Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to wait just a few seconds as people pop on. Welcome, welcome. While we are waiting, if you can put in your name, what organization, and how about your biggest communication challenge? Hello, Brittany. Name, organization, biggest communication challenge. Brenda, getting employees to read emails, newsletters, team meetings, etc. Thank you, Julie. Continue to put in those challenges, and we are going to get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Indiana Youth Institute's webinar, How Do We Build a Compelling Case for Our Organization? Telling your story, stating your case. My name is Whitney Johnson, and I am supporting the Strengthening Youth Programs Initiatives at IYI. Thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation. We are grateful to have the chance to connect as a community of Indiana youth workers who remain committed to meeting the needs of our youth and children. For those of you who are not familiar with IYI, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth. Listed here, you can see our vision that drives the work we do for Indiana youth. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few pointers that will help you engage with today's webinar. For any technical support issues, use the chat feature to send a message, and Erin Whitcomb, IYI's registration manager, is behind the scenes and she can assist you. Use this feature to converse with the group as well. As an added bonus, you can download a copy of today's PowerPoint from the chat. We also encourage you to upvote any or ask any questions. So please use that Q&A feature for any that you may have. Later today, you will receive an email with the link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about today's presentation. And if you don't receive the evaluation email, check your junk email as it may have been directed there. Once you complete that evaluation, you will be redirected to your certificate of participation. Like all of IYI's webinars, today's webinar will be posted on our website if you'd like to revisit a portion later, or if you want to share the opportunity to listen in with partners. All right. Our speaker today is Tamara Winfrey Harris. Tamara is a writer, speaker, and dedicated champion for all women and girls. She serves as president of Women's Fund of Central Indiana. A native of Gary, Indiana, Tamara graduated with a bachelor's degree from Greenlee School of Journalism at Iowa State University. She will be presenting a part 2 of this webinar at our annual Kids Count conference taking place December 3rd and 4th. So please register. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to our speaker for today, Tamara Winfrey Harris.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited that you used a picture of me that's like 15 years old. I look so much younger and fresher. I am so excited to be with you all today, and thank you for giving me a little bit of information about you in the chat. So I know Whitney asked, what are some of your communications challenges? And I see a few things here. And please bear with me. I have two screens. If I appear to be looking away, I am not. I am engaged with you. I see someone saying that, that it's a challenge knowing what platforms they should use to reach their targets, like their donors. How do you communicate a bunch of programs to your volunteers? Getting employees to pay attention to the information you send them. I see a couple of people said the elevator pitch is really hard. And how do I structure my communication so I'm not rambling? Someone said, I feel the need to give a lot of background. And how much background are you supposed to get? Other people said consistent information. So hopefully, I'll help answer some of those questions for you. I would encourage you as I'm going along, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I know Aaron and Whitney are keeping an eye out. If I can answer them during the presentation, I will. If not, we'll leave some time at the end. So is everybody ready? Then great. Let me share my screen. I hope that everybody is seeing a page that says telling your story. So telling your story, taking your communication to the next level. So let's get into it. So, first of all, why does good communications even matter? I feel like, a lot of people see communications, marketing, public relations as sort of the icing on the top of the work that we do, when in reality, it's the root of everything you do. Nothing, as someone who works in a not-for-profit space on behalf of women and girls, I can do nothing unless I can communicate to donors and legislators and potential participants in our programs, like what is the story, why I need their help, why their help is urgent. Um, and no less than Martin Luther King Jr. talked about the importance of public relations in the civil rights movement. So he said, public relations is a very necessary part of any protest or civil disobedience. The public at large must be aware of the inequities involved in such a system. In effect, in the absence of justice in the established courts of the region, nonviolent protesters are asking for a hearing in the court of world opinion. In other words, everything that we do, from business to social justice movements to not-for-profit work, requires good communications. Why? Because it helps us to build trust. Sorry about that. It helps us to build trust and generate support. It helps us to present and resolve problems. We're able to think ahead and see where communication might help smooth our pathway. It provides clarity and direction. You have a target, you have potential donors. What is it that you want them to do? It helps provide clarity and direction there. It helps us build relationships, create better relationships, and it helps us increase engagement. So very important, communications is the foundation of what we do with our work. So what are we going to talk about today? I'd say this is kind of a 101. I want to talk to you about how to develop key messages, um, how to share messages and control the conversation. Controlling the conversation may not sound great, but bear with me. I'm going to explain why it's important. But then I know some of you will be with us in person on December 3rd. And so while in this, I'm going to talk about a bit of theory and the how-tos, on December 3rd, when we're in person, there's going to be more opportunity to actually put some of these ideas into practice and start building out your own key messages and thinking about how you communicate strategically. I'll give you a little bit of time today, but much more time on December 3rd. Okay, so why would you trust me in telling you this information? So I will say, as Whitney shared, my background is in journalism. I went to journalism school, and my first job outside of school was in a newsroom at the Post-Tribune in Northwest Indiana. But since then, I spent more than 25 years working exclusively in communications and marketing. First, for some consumer marketing agencies in Chicago. I had clients like McDonald's Corporation and Georgia Pacific and the Sara Lee Foundation and the Milk Mustache campaign. Then working for cultural institutions at the Museum of Science and Industry, here in Indianapolis at the Eiteljorg Museum, and then at the Central Indiana Community Foundation. Um, Before I was president of Women's Fund of Central Indiana, I was a marketing communications person. And I always say we can do anything because, again, the foundation of our work is communications. I'm also a published writer and author. I've been published in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Cosmopolitan, and other outlets. I also have 3 books that have been published, and I'm a national speaker and thought leader on the intersection of race and gender. So I do a lot of communicating and a lot of talking, and I hope to share some of what I learn and have known with you. So first of all, what is good communication? Most importantly, good communication is clear. And when I say good communication is clear, I don't just mean that it's well written. Being well written is certainly one part of the equation, but also think about what unique clear means that the audience that you are intending to reach can understand. And so that could also mean, like, are you reaching out to the children of recent immigrants from Haiti, or Burma, and you don't have information that is translated into languages that their parents might speak? That's not good. That's not clear communication. So communication must be clear. It also must be honest and authentic. Very often, when people think of public relations and that sort of communications, a lot of times PR people get the reputation for stretching and polishing the truth. That is not what we do. There actually is a PR code of ethics. So, in addition to being clear and effective, you also want your communication to be honest and authentic and ethical. It should be well timed and aligned. We learn this as a kid, and sometimes we forget it as an adult. So, you knew when you were a kid not to ask your parents for something when they were stressed or mad, or if you hadn't done your chores. You know that there was probably a better way to communicate that. Similarly, as people who are operating not for profits, we may learn that probably the time to make a big media announcement is not during an election week. We just had an election week when you know that the news cycle is going to be consumed with talking about who's winning what race and who isn't. But on the other hand, right after a big piece of legislation that might, affect young people or might affect what you do, might be the perfect time for you to send out a fundraising message because it aligns and that's where people's thoughts are. So thinking about making your messaging well timed and also aligned. So when you're communicating, I need you to think about your mission and also think about your values. So don't forget yourself. Your communications being well timed and aligned means it also needs to be aligned with your mission and your values. Also, you want your communication to be audience focused. So even in your personal life, you probably communicate very differently to different people. You communicate differently when you're talking to your child versus, say, your spouse. Your spouse and your good girlfriend, or your guy friends, your boss and your neighbor, your pastor and your hairstylist. So you want to think about who your audience is and how you need to best speak to them, which means you may have a lot of different key messages that are built for specific audiences. You also want to choose the best words, the best tone, and the best message so that the other person on the end of your communication can understand you. And lastly, you want good communications is medium dependent. Someone mentioned that when they were talking about the challenges they have with communications. Look, how do you reach your donors? How do you reach the constituency that you might serve? Um, and then also, if something requires a lot of explanation or is complicated, a text communication or a tweet may not be the way to communicate it. Tough news that you need to deliver to your constituency or to your board members, you probably don't want to do that in an email where questions can't be answered. You want to pick up the phone. So, good communications is medium dependent. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of clarity. You want to make sure that your message is clear so that it lands and has, less chance of being misconstrued. You want to make sure that you get the response that you're looking for. So very often, someone mentioned how they start rambling, and very often you give people tons of information, but you forget to tell them exactly what it is you want them to do. So you have to think about a call to action. You also want to avoid using a lot of, jargon and acronyms. So think about it like you're speaking to a fifth grader. You want to speak so that anyone that you're talking to can understand. And sometimes that's very, very difficult. It's a problem we sometimes get into when those of us who are working in the not-for-profit space and we work a lot around one issue. And there is language that we use internally that is not necessarily, sorry about that, I am moving on too quickly, that is not language that the average person in the community understands. One example that I might give is when working with justice involved persons or people who have been formerly incarcerated, some of the language that you often hear is referring to them as returning citizens. That is acceptable internally for people working in that space. If you sent that out to a newsletter of people who were unaware of that, no one would know what a returning citizen is. Where are they returning from? Were they traveling abroad? Were they away in some other way? So think about that when you're communicating, that you're not using internal jargon and acronyms that your target is not going to understand. The other thing is, I want you to think about increasing your confidence. Clarity can help increase your confidence when you are discussing an issue. The more you talk about something, the easier it becomes to get up and speak. The clearer your messages are that you have written, the easier it is for you to share them, not just you, but for your staff, for your board members, for other people that you want to be ambassadors to also share your message. You also, the clearer you are, the easier it is for you to stand out from all of the noise. So there may be a lot of people communicating about youth in our community, but what makes your organization different? What makes your library different? What makes your community provider different? People need clarity around that issue to pull you out of the clutter and to pull you out of the noise. So again, clarity helps you stand out among the noise. I also, before I talk about what is a key message, I just wanted to say one thing about trying to use asset-based language. I always find that, sometimes not-for-profit communication um, can focus on the negatives, especially among communities and groups of people. So I encourage you to figure out, to talk about people's resilience and what they can do with additional help. So thinking about asset-based language as opposed to always speaking about a deficit. especially when talking about communities and people. So I've talked a lot about what makes good communications, what you need to think about. Now I want to talk about actually what is a message. Bear with me for a second. I just want to check and make sure I'm not missing any anything there might be in the chat. So bear with me. If I can see it. I don't see anything. If I am missing something, please let me know. I don't know if that's as visible to me right now while I'm sharing my screen. So what is a key message? You know, I always learn to also call these must-air messages. So this is the information. What information about your organization must your target audience hear? What do they, if you can say nothing else, what are the few facts that your target audience must hear, understand, and remember? These messages are not necessarily to be memorized or made public. As a matter of fact, the people who are delivering them should work really hard to put them in their own words, and they may be situational. So again, you may have several targets. You may have donors as a target. You may have, the people you provide services for as a target. You may have legislators as a target. And your key messages may be just a little different for each of them. So they are situational. And you may have some unique messages that align with events or programs or other things that you're doing. And once you have those standard must-air messages, and we're talking about no more than like 3 to 5 must-air messages, again, you're kind of creating an elevator speech. If someone hears nothing else out of your mouth, what are the most important things? So then you want to be able to support those key messages with supporting messages that bring them to life. So again, so what is a key message? Explained that to you. It's a must-air message. It's the information your target must hear. You don't need to memorize it. You should know it. You don't need to memorize it word for word, and it may be situational. So how do you craft that message? So how do you write your primary messages? So I'd like you to start, oh my goodness. I'd like you to start with your organization's mission or vision. Your key messages should align with your mission and your vision. And then ask yourself these questions. What do you do? Why do you do it? How are you different? And what value do you bring? Again, what do you do? Why do you do it? How are you different? And then what value do you bring? And remember, again, you might end up with different sets of messages because how you answer these questions may be dependent on the target that you're communicating with. I also want you to think about the tone you want to convey. Again, if you are talking to, say, potential partners, you might use very different language than when you're talking to a constituency that doesn't know your work as well. So I'm just going to give you an example from my own life. I'm sorry, I think there's a question from Anita Jackson. She wants to know, will the slides be shared? I would be happy to share the slides, Anita. So here's an example from my own experience. So the Women's Fund mission. So our mission is we convene, invest, and advocate so that everyone who identifies as a woman or girl in Central Indiana has equitable access to reach their full potential, no matter their place, race, or identity. And so when I think about our key messages, the first one is just what you heard. It's our mission. We convene, invest, and advocate to make our community better for women and girls. And the ways that we do that are by cultivating a robust and healthy ecosystem of women and girls serving our organizations, by harnessing the power of women's work, wealth, and wisdom, and by amplifying the stories of women and girls, especially those who are often ignored and underrepresented. So when people ask me, okay, what do you do? What is Women's Fund? That's the answer I give. Those, I think, are the four most important things about them that I'd like them, most important things about us that I'd like people to understand. Okay, but then what? Because there's a lot more that I would like to talk about as the leader of an organization. So, what about the sub messages, the sub bullets? So, you're also going to want to have secondary messages. And so, I would say this to think about 3 to 4 sub messages are plenty. Think about impressive details about your work. Think about awards and recognitions. Think about customer and client testimonials. And think about how you validate what you're saying. Are there studies that speak to the significance of your work? Do you have clients that can talk about how your work impacted them? So here's what some of those might look like. So I told you that one of my key messages is that we cultivate a robust and healthy ecosystem of women and girls serving organizations. So if someone asks me to speak more deeply about that, I would tell them that every year we grant more than $650,000 into the community to benefit women and girls. I would tell them that we have a trust-based philanthropy program and that there are 2 grassroots women-focused organizations that we are giving unrestricted grants to for 3 years and other support beyond the check. And I would tell them that we're working along with the Polis Center to create a State of Women in Central Indiana report that we hope that other not-for-profits can use to secure funding and deepen their work. So those are our sub messages. And I can say you can think about how you add passion and inspiration to your sub messages. So another thing that, I sometimes give an example of, I can say, we gave the first ever grant to Dress for Success when they were in a church basement. And today they serve X number of women. So think about color, think about adding passion, think about the really strong things that you can add to your sub messages that really underscore and support your key messages. They add color to your work and help people understand what it is that you do. What you're crafting is really an elevator speech. So think about it. You are riding in an elevator with a stakeholder or a potential donor or a community member, and you have 30 seconds from the ground floor to the 3rd floor to introduce yourself and your organization. What do you say? What are your key messages that help you make a connection? And I hope we can try this. I said I was going to give you a chance to try a little something today, and I would like to try that. I'm going to go off screen and I'm going to give you 10 minutes. And if I can, so I'm going to go back to the slide that talks about drafting key messages, your primary messages. And I want those of you who are on this webinar, I want to give you 10 minutes, and I would like you to draft 3 key messages for your organizations that would form an elevator speech. And when you're done with that, I'd like you to drop it in the chat and share with other people. So 10 minutes, I'm just going to give you 10 minutes. I'm going to go off screen. I will keep this screen about how to write primary key messages up. And I'd like all of you who are on this call to try your hand at writing key messages for your organization. What is your elevator speech? 10 minutes, go. Good luck. When you get it done, drop it in the chat. If anyone is struggling, share why you're struggling in the chat. What is the hardest thing about writing these key messages? I love what you said, Jamie. You're correct. It is hard not to sound canned and cheesy. And very often, missions and visions can sound kind of canned and cheesy. And so that's one of the reasons why we say these are not to be memorized. Because if I were actually like having a conversation with someone and I was like, well, I'll tell you what I do. I convene, invest, and advocate so that blah, blah, blah. It sounds kind of like corporate and institutional speak. So once you get these messages, like the really important thing to do is figure out how you say it in your language. So the key messages stand like they are, but then everybody who has to deliver your key messages have to figure out how to say them in a way that sounds natural to them. Crystal, I am all in with those key messages because you had me at pig production. Like, I feel like people must hear that and then say, tell me more. One good test for some of these is take these elevator pitches or key messages and give them to someone. It could be a friend or family member that doesn't know all about your organization. Give that to them and then ask them, okay, what does my organization do? And if they can't tell you, then maybe you need to go back to the drawing board. Better yet, hand that to someone in the target that you're interested in reaching, a potential donor or a family you may want to engage. Do they understand, based on what you've put here, exactly what your organization does? And one caution I would say, some of these are pretty long. So again, think of the 30 seconds you have to get from ground floor to third floor. Um, can some of these be shortened in a way that they can be captured in 30 seconds? Because that's all you will likely have to grab someone. If you're going to join us in person on December 3rd, I encourage you to bring these with you because I'd love to do some practicing. Can you really deliver this in language that sounds right to you in 30 seconds and then have an audience understand what you're talking about? Sorry, your 10 minutes are up, and I hope that that was helpful. I see I see some great key messages. I see ones that can be much shorter. Remember, 30 seconds. And when, as I said, when we come back together on December 3rd, we'll do some practicing to actually delivering some of these elevator pitches and these key messages and seeing how effectively you can deliver them in your own words in a limited amount of time. But for now, we are going to move forward. I want to leave a little bit of time for you because I feel like some people had some questions around communications that are not necessarily messaging related, but are more related to other parts of marketing communications. And I have a long career in that space, and I'd love to answer some of those questions for you. So I'm going to wrap up here and leave a little bit of time at the end to hear some of your other questions and possibly answer them. So I just want to talk for a little bit about controlling the message, which always sounds like kind of I don't know, it sounds bad because we're always told that conversation should be give and take. You should be listening and all of those things. And that is absolutely true. You do want to listen, and communications is a give and take. However, you also, as a communications or a leader of an organization, have a job to do when you're in conversation with someone. That job might be raising money. That job may be encouraging policy that is better for young people. That job may be encouraging people to use your services. And you're not, and unless you're getting your points across, then you're not being effective. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you can be effective as you're communicating. And part of that requires learning how to control the message. And when I say control, that means I'm thinking mostly about, if you have to go and have a media interview, any kind of interview, someone may approach you and they have a agenda on what they want to ask, and they think that they understand exactly the work you do, and they don't. So you don't want to let them be the ones that drive the conversation. You want to make sure that you're getting in your most important messages. And so here are some things that you should know when you're talking about working with media or anyone else in an interview conversation situation. The first thing to know is that there is no such thing as no comment. Oh, I think I may have, did we lose someone tell me, did we lose I think I may have,
I see a Zoom screen.
okay, we lost our one moment. I will bring back our lovely presentation here. There we go. Better?
Yes, we're back.
Fantastic. We are back. So there is no such thing as no comment. So when you're in an interview situation or in any situation where someone is asking you hard questions, you don't get to just say, I'm not answering that. But that doesn't mean you have to give away information that you shouldn't, or that's classified, or it's potentially harmful. You have to respond to the questions that are asked of you, but it's also okay not to know. So it is also possible to say to someone, I don't know the answer, or I don't have that data or information right now, but I will figure it out for you. It's okay not to have the specific answer that the other person is looking for. So I always recommend figuring out, considering the questions that your stakeholders may ask. That may be your board, it may be your donors, it may be another constituency, and developing an FAQ with strategic answers to them. That's an internal document. And again, it's not meant to be memorized, but it's meant to be there so that everyone that has to communicate about your organization can answer questions correctly. As an example, I have a board meeting next week, and my board is going to vote on 3 recommendations that I think are really important for the future of Women's Fund. And so not only did they receive a proposal, but I also created an FAQ with answers to the questions that I had heard most often as I had spoken to board members. And so I am using that. I also shared it with some of my executive committee members that were having to talk about the proposal. So everybody is communicating the same and everybody has the same key messages. So everybody is on the same page. So sorry that the technology, I am, here we go. So your goal in any conversation, no matter who you're talking to, is to control the conversation. And when I say control the conversation, I mean you want to own the interview or the conversation. And so that means learning. There are 3 things I want you to walk away knowing, and that is bridging, flagging, and hooking. So when you are talking to someone and they ask you a question, and maybe it's going far afield from what you actually want to talk about, or the far afield from what is really important to talk about, you can use a bridge. You can answer their question and say, you know, and I also want to talk. I also think it's important for you to know XYZ. So that's an answer. That's an example of bridging. So if someone asks me, for instance, what did Women's Fund? We have a program that was called the Go program that is now being morphed into something called Generosity Forward. So if someone asks me something about that legacy program, I may answer and also bridge to say, and what you might be excited to know is that that program is expanding into a new program called Generosity Forward. May I tell you about that? So that's bridging from what they wanted to talk about to what's more effective for me. You can also use flagging when you're communicating. So when you're talking to someone and you want to emphasize what is most important for them to know. So you might be talking to a donor, and you're talking about all of the great things. And you also may want to say, but I want you to understand that this program cannot continue unless we raise X amount of dollars by the end of this year. Or I want you to know how much your contribution affected us. It allowed us to serve 100 extra youth this year. So you can flag and say, this is what's most important. This is the one thing you should know. This is your takeaway. That's an example of flagging. So we talked about bridging. So that's shifting to what you feel is most important. We talked about flagging, which is identifying the most important thing. And then there's also hooking, which influences the next question you will be asked. And actually, the example that I gave you for bridging also kind of does that. Someone asks you a question about a legacy program, but you really want to talk about the new program. So you hook them and send them in that direction. Would you like to know more about that? Or I don't remember what the organization was, but it was a tie with youth and pig production, which I think is like I hear that and I want to know more. So, one way of hooking would be to say, you know what, we've got a program that supports youth and their learning and their mental well-being and also helps feed people in the community. And it's all around pigs and pig production. Would you like to know more? I think most people would say yes. So, how do you hook on and pave a way from your message to what you want to talk about even more? So when we get together on December 3rd, I want to spend more time working on key messages, elevator speeches that are short enough for you to actually deliver them. And we're going to do some sample and test interviews to give you a chance at actually having a conversation or an interview and using some of the messages that you have created. But for today, I will pause because we are about 8 minutes from the top of the hour. And I wonder if there are any questions about what we've talked about today, or any other questions about communications, public relations, or marketing that I can answer for you. Feel free to drop them in the chat. Questions about today or in general about communications and marketing. And I'll pause and give you some time to answer.
While we're waiting for some questions to come in, when you think about that target audience, a lot of people hear you always write for an eighth grader. Is
Mhm.
that still true?
I think generally that's true. But again, for instance, you know, if I'm looking to partner with, since one of our focus areas for women is personal safety and intimate partner violence, if I was looking to partner with, say, Coburn Place here in central Indiana on a project and they were my target, I wouldn't need to talk to them at an eighth grade level because they work in that space. They know the information. Like that's it. That's an occasion where I can use maybe some of the lingo. I don't have to, I mean, for lack of a better word, dumb it down a little bit. That is different than having to talk to the community or maybe a legislator that doesn't know anything about domestic violence. And then I have to make it a little more clear in order to get the effect and the answer, the outcome that I want. Any suggestions on how to get internal buy-in on the vision when the grant proposal is broad? Dawn, can you tell me a little bit more about that? About, one of the ways that I get internal buy-in is to include internal stakeholders in like crafting the grant or crafting the idea before the proposal is developed. Can you tell me more? Is that the kind of thing that you're thinking about? Yes. So, one of the things, like I said, I find useful is, I don't know if anyone has ever been the recipient of where your employer gets a grant, this big idea, and then it's handed to you. And there were a lot of different things you would have done differently if you had had some input into that. So I think very often if you want buy-in, then you need the people who are going to be executing at the table at the very beginning. That doesn't mean that they all necessarily have final say or they're the final decision makers, but they should have a voice and they should be kept in the loop and communicated with before you have a grant in your hands and then you have to steer it, if that makes sense. Is that helpful? Anita said it would save so many headaches if this was if this was the case. Also, I see, can you share any formats or formulas to keep people reading? How do we make it past the delete button? That's hard. If you're talking about a newsletter, that's really hard. I think all of us know that, sort of some of the typical reading rates can be around 2 and 3% for direct mail or even less. Open rates are really difficult because if you're like me, I get a ton of different emails from a ton of different organizations in my inbox. And you're right, very often I go in and just delete them all because I don't have time to read them. So, one of the things that we do is try to have a lot of different methods of communicating. So, yes, we will put things in a newsletter. We will also put things on social media. We might also send things directly to our board. This year, we launched a magazine, and we only do a very short run of print copies of that magazine. The rest we just email to everyone as if it were a newsletter. But the reason for the magazine is that we realized that we had a lot of emeritus board members and people that had been previously involved with us who were maybe retired. So they're not as plugged into their email, they're not on social media, but they weren't hearing what we were doing. And those people are potential committee members, stakeholders, supporters, donors, and we need them to know. So we made a decision that they need stuff in print. And so we gave it to them in the way that they needed. That wasn't necessarily cost effective for everyone, but it was important to us that those people got that information in print. So part of that is figuring out what is the best, one, having a bunch of different methods for delivery, sending the message a lot of different times. And sometimes it means doing something a little differently to reach your target. Let's see. What are some tips you would give about communicating ideas for new programming within an organization to a CEO and board? I think it's important to explain the why first. Why are we doing this? What problem are we solving? What constituency are we helping? And I always like to be able to explain the why you know, um, in a personal way. So not just with data, but how do you make data real? Is there a personal story that you've seen that you can share, that will really, and then also a personal example of the impact. I think that's what gets people excited, especially a CEO. If you can also frame it as, what can I help you solve as the CEO? Here's how this program will solve a problem that you have, is also very compelling. Last one, Kyla, and then we can pick up again on December 3rd. Tips for condensing your key messages when your not-for-profit does so many things. So it may be a case where you have to have more key messages than most, but you think of it as kind of like a menu. So, maybe when you're talking to a legislator, I'm choosing these 3 to 4 key messages. But when I'm talking to potential participants in our programs, I'm going to use these 3 other ones, because it could mean that you have a bunch of key messages, but not everybody needs to hear them all at the same time, if that makes sense. I hope this was helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tamara. I have so many notes, and I am really excited to learn more on December the 3rd at the Kids Count Conference. And so again, as we've mentioned, if you would like to learn more, you want to get some interview practice or even your key messaging, please do not forget to register for our annual Kids Count Conference on December 3rd through the 4th. And Tamara will be doing, as we mentioned, a part 2, if you will, of this webinar during the conference. All of IYI's upcoming events can be found at www.iyyi.org/events. Receive the latest updates and opportunities by signing up for our newsletter. Same, www.iyyi.org/newsletters. And as we conclude, I sincerely thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your impact, voice, and choice to learn and partner with IYI. Later today, you will receive an email that includes a copy of the presentation and a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about today's presentation. Upon completion, you will be redirected to your certificate of completion. If you don't receive the evaluation email, check that junk email as it may have been directed there. That concludes our presentation, and on behalf of Indiana's youth, thank you again for showing up today and every day for Indiana youth.